Right. Kia ora, guys. I'm Neralyte, and today I'm looking at Dragon Age Inquisition. I just finished it. I've done my first playthrough. It was fantastic. Actually, really enjoyed the game. I put in probably close to 100 hours on my first playthrough. Did that on Nightmare difficulty to see what it was like at the higher end of the difficulty spectrum, and also went through playing as a warrior tank, and ended up specializing into Templar instead of into a champion. The Templar is actually a lot more fun from my perspective, being that you deal with a lot of demons throughout the game. But let's get started. I wanted to have a look at a lot of the game, have a bit of a rant about Dragon Age, because there's a lot about the game that kind of didn't really sit right with me, or there were problems with it, but there was also a lot of good as well. So wanted to get that out there and have a chat about it. So character creation is our first topic, and I want to talk about it being but ugly. I don't know if anybody else had this problem as well. I'm sure there are ways to create really beautiful characters in the game. However, that was not my experience. I did manage to make a character which I really liked. I really liked the look of him, and he kind of gave me that Inquisition vibe. I probably spent around about 5 hours or so playing with the character creation in Dragon Age, trying to play with both male and female characters, as well as the different races. And I kind of felt that with male characters, it was quite easy to get a an all right look, and make them a little bit nicer looking. Whereas the female characters, I kind of found personally that I wasn't really able to create something that I was super happy with. I ended up creating a female elf mage at one point, which I am happy with. I really like her. However, that was the only character that was really happy with. All my subsequent characters were deleted, just because I wasn't happy with how they looked. And that partly kind of comes down to the way that Dragon Age character creation lighting is done, and we've all seen this from Dragon Age Origins and Dragon Age 2 as well, where the character creator doesn't really reflect the character in game because of poor lighting, and that really wasn't addressed in Dragon Age Inquisition. It kind of felt like it was really dark and moody for the character creator. Then you got out into the world, and it wasn't so dark and moody, and you saw all the flaws that you couldn't see because everything was so dark. Um, and the other thing is, well, kind of lacking sort of body features and things like height and weight and things like that. Not a massive deal. I can kind of understand it being easier to do armor models and all that kind of stuff if the person doesn't have the choice of having being able to do height, things like that. But it would have been nice to kind of see something along those lines. I do like to go through the character creator and really try and develop it as much as I can and play around with all the sliders, all the settings, and spend hours creating that perfect character that I like. Wasn't really possible in Dragon Age, but I got something that I was kind of happy with. There is a lot of customization in the face, so there is plenty of opportunity to create a really good looking character if you're capable of that. Unfortunately, I wasn't quite so well capable. But that's pretty much it for character creation. It is your typical Dragon Age character creation. I don't really have too much to say about that or rant about, other than those things that I have already talked about. But you know, that's how it goes. I am happy with what I got, and a little bit of tweaking and playing around, you can get a pretty decent looking character. Um, so on to first impressions, gameplay, all that kind of goodness. First thing that I noticed, going straight into the game was just how gorgeous it actually is. The game world is immense. Such a huge game world. There's so many places to visit, and it is absolutely stunning visually. Now, I've seen lots of people saying that, oh, it's too kind of realistic or anything. I didn't really find that. I found that it was kind of right on the right verge for me. It wasn't too realistic, but it wasn't cartoony. Kind of had a really good atmosphere to it and drew you in really well. So to me, the graphics are just really, really nice, and I kind of hope that when they do eventually do like DLC and stuff, that they do explore other regions, possibly more of the dark roads or something. The lack that there was in that game in Dragon Age, kind of like there was content in there, but you never really got to delve really deep into it, and that's something that I'd really like to do and really like to see in the game at some point. Um, as for actual gameplay, especially things like the combat, absolutely loved it. Dragon Age Origins was a very tactical game. You used the tactical camera all the time, or I did anyway, and really, really great. Great way to play. Absolutely love that. Dragon Age 2 introduced the more action-oriented combat, and people really were kind of one side or the other. Either you really liked it or you really hated it. I really liked it. However, I did miss Dragon Age Origins tactical cam and the ability to slow everything down to really be strategic and think things through. Um, and that was kind of missed in Dragon Age 2, where it was a lot more action oriented. So the gameplay in Dragon Age Inquisition I found really, really great because you had both, the best of both worlds, really. And playing on Nightmare difficulty gave me the opportunity to utilize the tactical camera more than what I would have if I was just playing from like the normal difficulties. And that's definitely something that's kind of important for me in a game, is if you're going to introduce something into an RPG where it's a very tactical environment, you should really take advantage of that and kind of be forced sort of to take advantage of that. Whereas Dragon Age 2, you never really had to. And the difficulty of Nightmare in the beginning of Dragon Age Inquisition led to me using the tactical cam quite a lot. Now, that's not to say that the difficulty continued like that. However, my first impression was that it was really great, really solid system. And if you wanted to play action, you could. If you wanted to play tactical, you could. If you wanted to play a mix of both, you could. And there was no really downside to it. It was your own personal preference that really dictated what you were going to do and how you were going to play the game. Um, there were some problems in scope and size of the game, especially once you got out of the prologue. I found going into the hinterlands my first time through. Now I have gone through again. I'm still playing through my second playthrough. I'm very, very near the start of the game still with my mage, and I've kind of learnt the problems with, the hinterlands and that starting experience where the first time I got trapped and stayed there for hours and hours. I was there for probably about 10 or 15 hours doing Hinterlands and Storm Coast, and there wasn't really much else to my gameplay other than trying to do all the side quests. And I was like, oh my god, there's so much to do. I have to get out. I have to do all of this. Wasn't really the case though, and I've kind of learnt that for my second playthrough, where I can take my time. I don't have to go and do everything. I know that I can kind of go off and follow the main story a little way, and explore regions, other regions, instead of just sitting in the hinterlands. So from that point, like I kind of felt like, wow, this game is massive, it's awesome and everything, but I felt like I was kind of stuck in this one area, and I didn't want to continue lest I left something behind that I couldn't go back and get later in the game, which of course we know is not really how the game plays. Um, but that was definitely an impression that's kind of struck me as being like, well, do I risk it? Do I go? Do I need to consult somebody and talk to someone who's actually gone through this area to see what I need to do here? Um, and going from that, like I spent a fair bit of time with crafting in the beginning as well, and especially gathering. Now, this is something that was not really my cup of tea. I felt kind of obligated to run around and collect a lot of stuff in the beginning, and there is a lot of stuff to collect for crafting, a lot, and it's unfortunately not broken down very well in your inventory, which we'll get to a little bit later. But as far as my first impression on the crafting system went, it looked really fun. It looked really solid. A lot of gathering and sort of grinding went into it, and I was kind of on the fence as to whether or not I liked that aspect, and I was kind of hoping that maybe later on down the track that I wouldn't have to go out and get stuff, and I would have people to go and get it for me, NPCs, that I could then go collect later on from storehouses or something like that, which sort of proved to be true, but not to the extent that I was hoping. But overall, first impression was absolutely fantastic gameplay. The writing and story felt really solid, really nice, and it was beautiful. It was absolutely beautiful, and I kind of got lost just exploring some of the zones. And the only really downfall that I felt was the trap of coming to that first zone and feeling like I had to complete everything before I moved on and lost stuff. So overall, not really a bad start. Quite a lot of fun. Um, and then looking at like the okay, the bad, and the ugly. Now this is where the majority of my rant's gonna probably start because there was a lot of stuff that I didn't like in the game. That's not to say that it's not a great game. It's a lot of fun, and I will be going back to play it some more. However, there was a lot of frustrating things in the game. On top of the good parts as well. Some things to note, things like character interactions. It was really cool to see that no matter who you had in your party, where you were or anything, they had some really interesting dialogue going on in the background. And some of the character interactions in your party were fantastic. I think probably my favorite interactions for party was probably having Iron Bull and Vivian in the same party, and watching their relationship sort of blossom into this really interesting, um, interesting and dynamic sort of relationship between those two characters. And that was just something that was kind of party chatter in the background, not really a major aspect, but gave me a bit of a laugh through some of the gameplay, and I stopped on occasion to listen to what they were saying, which is really, really cool. Um, Going through the game, I did notice there are some points in the game where you make decisions or you've got interactions and quests and things like that where you do require certain party members. And in some cases, mostly the main story, there was a very clear indication as to when you would need somebody. Going through Elven Ruins or something like that, and not having Solace in your party would give a very clear indication that when you got to a point in it, that it would have been beneficial to have him in your party, and you knew right then and there, okay, maybe I should have taken Solace with me instead of Vivian because Vivian doesn't really know anything about this and Solace does, and it was very clear that he would have been a beneficial party member at that point in the game. On the flip side, there were some very obscure ones as well, where you go to hand in quests, mostly side quests and little tidbits, where you were unsure how to sort of complete them or get the right interactions because you required being a certain race or you required a certain person in your party, but there was absolutely no indication as to who that person was that you needed. So you can't. I kind of felt like I'd go to um, I'd go to the map and go to character select and I would select a party and then go in and go to this person and talk to them, be like, okay, so that person doesn't interact or anything. Maybe I'll try somebody else, and just keep going back and forth until I had the right party member in my team to actually initiate some form of interaction with that NPC, which was a little annoying. It's nothing major. It only happens a few times in the game that I noticed, but it was definitely something that was kind of really obscured. Um, the other ones being things like romance, the interactions for the game for romance. Now, I've heard some good, some bad people's views on it, about the romance in Dragon Age Inquisition. It seems like a very hot topic for some people. For me, it was more of a, okay, let's try and woo someone, see who I can get and what I can get. And they had some really, really good interactions for romance in the game, throughout the game. And Unfortunately, some didn't continue. Now, through my first playthrough, and I'm going to just say spoilers here because there are going to be some spoilers, so if you don't want to listen to them, idea is probably skip this or turn it off now. But the romance through my playthrough was um, frustrating, is probably the word for it. I played a male human, which doesn't lead you to too many options, although at the time I didn't really know what your options were. I just kind of went out and flirted with just whoever to see what would happen. Got rejected by Vivian, which was a little upsetting. So kind of moved on from her. Didn't like Cassandra so much as a character. I haven't liked her. Didn't like her in the second game. Didn't like her in this game. So I kind of stayed away from her. Having finished the game, I kind of thought I kind of found out that maybe she's not so bad, but we'll go down that track when we go down that track. The most natural relationship in terms of romance that I actually found in the game was with Scout Harding, who's a female dwarf. You don't see her, she's not a main character. You don't really see her all that often. But every time you go into a new zone, she greets you and you have the chance to have a bit of a flirtatious encounter with her. After a while, she does end up back at your home base and you can have a chat to her there. However, nothing comes from it. That part is not, there's nothing there. That romance does not actually exist as a viable romance in game. You can flirt and get to a stage where you think it's going to go further, but it never does. And I don't know if that's oversight on the devs' part, or they didn't want you romancing a female dwarf for some reason, or whether it's meant to be some form of DLC or something stupid like that later on down the track. But it was very, very disappointing to see something like that where um, she was a fantastic character, and in the beginning, I wasn't even flirting with her. She was just the NPC who gave me the lay of the land and everything when I came into an area. Didn't really think anything of it, but she's actually the scripting for her, the writing, the voice acting, everything is really really nice. It's really great, and your interactions with her. I felt just kind of become onto a more personal note as you play through, regardless of whether you actually notice who she is or anything when you first start playing. Having been rejected through the obscure nature of non-continuing dialogue, I kind of went off and I was like, okay, I'll romance somebody who I can romance, and found Josephine and started that one, and that was an interesting romance. I know that, like, from 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 the story writer's perspective, Josephine is a noble woman. She's very uh, she's not uptight, but she's very very proper and very prim, and you kind of get a sense of that through your relationship with her, and you kind of it's kind of told that way through the interactions as well, where you barely see them kiss. They only really kiss a few times. It takes a long time before it actually gets to that stage, and she's very very proper in front of the camera, and that's kind of what it feels like in terms of the relationship with that character. It didn't really feel like me myself as the Inquisitor was having a romance with this character. What it felt like was I was the wingman to the Inquisitor, and I was kind of watching and giving him advice and stuff like that from the wings. And it's really the interaction kind of puts you in that position. It puts you in the position of a third wheel, essentially, and it feels really odd, breaks immersion completely, and kind of ruins the romance on a personal level. You watch it play out as a bystander, as opposed to as the main character, which I felt was a little bit frustrating, and was kind of unnecessary for them to do it that way. But to each their own. It does show what kind of character she is and her values and things as well. So you do get a sense of that through that. However, to me, it felt like I wasn't really the one doing it. I was just kind of telling the Inquisitor as a mate what to do. Um, so, bit of a pity there. Now, I'll try some of the other romances throughout my other gameplays. I'm playing, like I said, a female alpha mage at the moment, and we'll see how that goes. But um, all in all, not really overly impressed with the romance and relationships that you can build with characters in the game at this stage. Um, but the overall character interactions are really, really cool. Now, let's go away from that and go on to something else and talk about things like the areas and the content. Um, so the game is huge. It's massive. There are big areas, many areas to go and visit, and each one of those areas is quite massive and has a story unto itself, which is really cool, really enjoyable, really fun. Heaps of it, so much to do, so much side questing, so many areas to explore, so many things to see. And I kind of felt like it belittled the story in some situations where I had so much to do, and I would spend anywhere up to, 20 or so hours not continuing the story, doing side quests and exploration and checking out the areas and things like that, and it detracted from it a lot. So in the end, I was feeling um, a bit exhausted from having all these different zones, these massive areas to go run around in, but essentially not really helping towards the main story, not really telling anything other than the local story, plus some side quests and things like that. Um, so, in my opinion, really awesome, huge content, really cool, overwhelming, maybe too much. Um, like maybe there was too much stuff to go and do and go and see, and it was a bit tiring to kind of get to all of it in the end while still maintaining the story. As the story is not an overly large aspect of the game, I would kind of say that the main story aspect of Dragon Age is maybe 20 or 30% of the actual game, along with the areas. You visit a number of areas that have nothing to do with the main story. They're just side quests and areas unto themselves, and it's up to you whether or not you actually want to go and explore. However, playing on Nightmare difficulty, I kind of felt obligated to go and explore in order to grind up levels as well, because the main story doesn't afford you the opportunity to level with it. You sometimes have to go off to the side and things like that, which is fine. I have no problem with that whatsoever. I have a problem with maybe going off for 20 hours to try and complete everything so that I can actually come back to the story and progress to the next stage. Um, to get what I perceived as the most out of each area and the game along the way. Um, so yeah, in my opinion, maybe too large. Maybe it could have been toned down. There's areas that weren't really all that important, that maybe could have been left out or be DLC along with a new part of the story or something to that effect. Just my opinion. Um, and going on to that grinding and things like that as well, the difficulty, I found that it really fluctuated throughout the game. The difficulty was really, really hard in the beginning, and playing through like the hinterlands, feeling like I was kind of stuck there in the beginning. It was actually really, really still enjoyable because it was difficult, and I was using the tactical camera almost exclusively instead of doing action combat. And I would only let it go to action combat once I know that I had kind of won and I was mopping up the scene, as opposed to running straight in. That didn't persist throughout the game, and I kind of felt a little bit sad that I was no longer using the tactical camera. I was no longer forced to use it. I used it on occasion, but it just kind of felt like it was just slowing me down because the difficulty really wasn't there to force to make me really decide on what I was going to do. The AI took care of itself. It did what needed to be done, and I was able to run in and just hack and slash my way through a number of encounters. Um, and surprisingly enough, a number of encounters actually became easier with my party dead. So I found that if I was taking on dragons or some of the rifts or even some of the boss encounters, if I let my entire party die and just played my main character as a warrior tank, I was pretty much invulnerable, and I wasn't using health potions. I was just keeping 100% guard up the entire time and able to just slowly whittle down my opponents solo through some of the encounters, which kind of felt a little bit odd. But at the same time, um, I wouldn't like the difficulty to be exaggerated so much that I was forced to tactical cam everything. Maybe tactical cameras on things like rifts, bosses, and dragons. Something along those lines. If the difficulty was there to force you to tactical cam on those, and then your general encounters in the world you could kind of pick between, I would be happy with. But there wasn't that kind of consistency through it. It kind of just fell by the wayside, and I felt like I could just go action through a good chunk of the content in the game. This wasn't always the case, and I found this in Orlais the first time that you go to the palace. Um, the Venatori there, as well as the last boss, were, I don't know. I want to say that they were bugged or something. Scaling was out the window or something. I have no idea what happened. But I went from dominating everything to having my tank with full guard up get one shot by a trash mob, and not knowing how it even happened. And that was kind of my experience of the palace was a fight. I basically have to block doorways. I have to tactical cam the crap out of this, and just uh, just deal with the fact that every single one of my characters, as soon as they got touched, they were dead. That was it. Like I say, I don't know if that was a issue with the game where the difficulty scaled incorrectly, or their damage numbers were way out the window, because it definitely seemed that way. My tank at the time was running around about 950 health, and with 100% guard up, he was getting hit, I think, for around about 15 to 1700 damage per hit. I believe that was possibly on critical hits. Normal hits were around about 700, which was still nearly one-shotting my tank. So that felt really rude. That just felt really, really rude that I'd gone to this part of the game and then all of a sudden everything was kind of one-shotting me. I dealt with it, I kept going, I persevered and went through almost the entirety of the palace right up to the boss, with nightmare difficulty getting through this. Once I got to the boss, however, was a completely different ball game again, where I had a boss that my melee characters could barely even touch because she jumped around and jumped on walls and was ranged and made it nearly impossible for them to kind of catch up to her before she moved to another spot. On top of that, there were ads spawning in there that were constantly one-shotting me. The boss was ranged and constantly one-shotting me, and it became a nightmare after about 6 or 7 attempts. I gave up. I turned it down to normal and went through the encounter. Now on normal, I didn't even use a single health potion. So you can kind of see what the scale is and how it changed dramatically from being on Nightmare, where I was getting constantly one shot, to going to normal, where I face rolled the content without a problem. And I felt like that was a really um, poorly designed area of the game in terms of gameplay and difficulty, which was really frustrating, really annoyed me. Hopefully that has changed later on. But other than that, the difficulty kind of remained the same throughout the game, and I wasn't really forced to use the tactical cam, although on occasions I did choose to use it because I like it. because I like it. Um, but that wasn't the most kind of underwhelming thing. I think the most underwhelming aspect of the game was in its story itself. Not to say that the story was underwhelming, the size and what you actually were able to do with in terms of the story felt underwhelming compared to the enormous amount of content that you were given outside of that. It was a pity to see that dragons never made it into kind of story. There was only the one dragon at the end, um, although you could kind of get two dragons. We won't go into that. The dragon at the end was an interesting encounter, although it was not as hard as the other dragons in the game. I found those encounters to be harder. Now, I've only killed 3 dragons so far. I haven't managed to take them all down. I have done many encounters with a number of them to see where I'm at, whether I need to get more items and work on my characters more. I have been working on them and trying to get there. So we'll see how that goes. The one downside that I had with the dragon encounters came back to difficulty again with it was easier once my party was dead and was just me standing underneath the dragon because I took next to no damage, whereas my entire party, the rest of my party, the AI forced them to go out and they were getting targeted because they were never really moving into the right positions or anything. To get away from the AoE effects that the dragons did, which meant that they were a hassle to keep alive and keep going, and I would generally keep them up for the first half of the fight and then not worry about them and just bash away with my little tank because I could take it down without having to constantly change between characters to make them move out of things. Um, but the story definitely felt a little bit underwhelming because the majority of the really interesting content that I found was actually outside of that, and dragons were a big part of it, which I would have liked to have seen in the story a little bit more than what they did. Um, but overall, the story was really solid, really good, just a bit too short for my liking compared to the rest of the game. And to go on with like the difficulty and stuff like that. Sorry to just keep piling that one on, but um, part of it kind of stemmed for me in the crafting system. And I think that's mainly because the crafting became so OP at some points in the game. It was insane how good some of the gear you got for crafting actually was. I was using armor sets that I had made at level 12 that I was still wearing at level 18 because none of the gear that dropped was any better than what I had already crafted. And I was kind of hanging out for that next crafting recipe, that next tier of armor, that next tier of weapon to craft, rather than looking out for any of the legendary drops or epic drops rather, or any of the content drops. Um, so it was a great system. It worked really well. I love the fact that you can go into the crafting and you can decide on what stats you want. You had a lot of customization in there. You could change the color depending on what materials you were using. And then after you'd created your armor, you could create armor pieces to reinforce it, and that changed the look of the armor again and made it even more special to wear from my point of view, because it was something that you had created yourself and crafted and was a bit more unique. However, that did detract from whatever was dropping at the time, what content you were doing, because you would get to the end, you'd kill a boss, and then you'd drop a piece of armor that was no better than what you were wearing that you had crafted. And it kind of felt like a bit of a letdown. It's like, oh, well, I've got this crafted piece. Maybe I can give this piece to one of the characters that I don't use too often, and save some crafting materials instead of crafting them some armor. And that's kind of how a lot of the items felt in the game outside of crafting, was that they would drop and I would go, who else other than myself might be able to use this? Because pretty much the majority of gear upgrades that I was getting throughout the game were through crafting. There are some really cool crafted things in there as well. And some unique items which I still have yet to acquire. There are a lot of unique items in the game. There's shields and what is it? Spears. There's a banana on a stick that you can get, which I don't think I can actually get. I got two sad splinters for it, but you need three, and they come from keep doors, and I didn't really knock down one of the keep doors, so I don't know if I can go back and get that. So I may have missed out on that item in the playthrough, the first playthrough. However, I know now kind of what to do for the second playthrough. Um, and there are some little fun items like that in the game that you kind of want to hold on to. Hader's Razor made a return as well, which I found quite hilarious. Unfortunately, at the time, I had a whole bunch of crafted gear that was way better than it, so it kind of just rotted in my inventory for a while until I decided to sell it. But it was kind of cool to see items like that returning in the game. Um, but that's basically it for the crafting. It was really cool. I think it was a little bit too OP. I think the scaling was a little bit off, where crafting items scaled way too high and were way too useful at times. I think they need to kind of dumb that down a bit and make it so that, maybe you can craft an OP item, but it requires you to do certain things and beat certain bosses or something in the game in order to get the items required for it, because the general items that you could get in the game were way too easy to get, which meant that you could easily craft whatever you wanted throughout the game and not have to worry about any of the drops. Which made me kind of not appreciate a lot of the items that the devs have obviously put a bit of time and effort into creating. Um, and throughout the game as well, um, I wanted to talk about the kind of lost sense of time in the game. It's not lost. You get cues as to how long the game has been progressing over. At one point, you're told that it's been months since the Inquisition started and rah rah rah. So you kind of get an impression of how long the game's going for. However, that sense of time is lost in general gameplay, and it feels very disjointed as to how long you've been playing for, how long, like the time frame in the game, and things like that. I think going back to older games that started this sort of this genre, things like Baldur's Gate, the original Baldur's Gate, or Icewind Dale, where they tracked your actual play time as days and minutes. You had a clock and a sun timer and everything, so you kind of felt like however far you got in the game, however much time you spent in the game, it was still there on screen and reflected um, in your playtime as well. So when you went to load up a game, you could see that your Baldur's Gate game in-game time had gone for 24 days and 8 hours, and then you'd get in and you'd see what time of day it was. When you were traveling from one area to another, time would pass and it'll tell you how long it had been. Maybe I'm getting finicky about this, but for me that kind of gave me a good sense of time frame for the game, and I didn't feel like I was losing time, or that the transition from going to a town to a far outlying village actually took a certain amount of time, whereas in the Dragon Age Inquisition, kind of felt like you were instantly porting left, right, and center, and there was no real sense of time given throughout the game, apart from a few cues from NPCs to let you know how much time had passed. Um, but that's kind of finicky. That's me. I like to have that sense of time through a game like this because to me it felt like it was taking over the course of possibly years, whereas the course of the game actually only takes place over several months. And that's pretty much it for the okay, the bad, and the ugly. Like I said, there's massive ranting. The last thing that I want to put in this section is the buggy bits, because there is a lot of bugs in the game. It feels like every time I was playing, I was running into a new bug. Or an old bug that I had encountered before. We kind of expect that from big game titles like this, where it's such a big, vast world, and there are so many variables that you can't possibly um, predict what's going to happen in any given environment as far as programming goes, and making sure that everything acts accordingly in the game world. So under that, you can kind of forgive the fact that there is a fair few bugs in the game. However, we're kind of at a stage where all games are big games now. There's no small games. I mean, we do have our indie titles, and they have their share of bugs as well. However, the scale of games now is to an extent where should we expect there to be bugs, or should the testing be thorough enough to be able to take out the majority of them? Back in the days of Morrowind, and older games in the Elder Scrolls series, we forgave that kind of stuff because those were really massive games in an industry where games of that size didn't really exist too much. They were taking on massive scope and scale, and it was kind of expected that there would be bugs and things to contend with, and there were plenty of them to contend with. And it was kind of the expectation that the bigger the game, the more bugs there would be in it. However, that was quite a long time ago now. There's a lot more money going into the production of these games. There's a lot more time going into the production of these games. And I don't feel that the amount of bugs that I saw in Dragon Age was really that okay. I was kind of hoping that, there wouldn't be quite so many. For such a big title game. I've had everything from falling through the world, glitching into things, having periods where my character simply cannot move, he's just stuck in place, being flung miles up into the air. And this is just a few examples from my first gameplay with my warrior going through. I've been playing on the PS4 as well, to note. I'm playing on PS4, I'm not playing on PC. So that's the console version, which doesn't necessarily get it patched possibly as quickly as the PC versions get patched. So this may be something that I'm kind of getting used to, as I'm a PC gamer. I don't play on console platform all too often, and I'm not entirely sure of the patch cycle for games like this at this stage. But that's my impression of it anyway. Hopefully, some of the bugs are fixed later on. But that's it for the game, for the single player game. Like I said, this was my rant section. This is the more of the things that I had problems with. There is still so much to the game that is so good and keeps drawing you back. Like I said, I'm at about 100 hours through on my first playthrough. I've completed the game on that playthrough, and I've started another character to try and do a different little bit of a different story. Um, so outside of single player, there's also the multiplayer maps, very similar to what BioWare tried to achieve with Mass Effect 3, however, not integrated to the main story or single player. So you don't feel obligated to go and play multiplayer, which may or may not have been the right choice. It's much the same affair as Mass Effect 3. The maps are larger, they're more dungeon delves rather than sort of capture point waves or anything like that, or holdout. Um, but it's not really my thing. I tried to put a bit of time into it. I put around about 20 hours or so into multiplayer now, and while it is enjoyable in some aspects, it's more enjoyable with friends than it is without friends, as nobody seems to use their mic. It's a very quiet affair, and you just run through, do what you need to do, get out, and do it again. With friends, however, we have a little bit of banter, a little bit of play, and it makes it a little more enjoyable. However, it never felt very rewarding to me. It never felt like I was actually getting anywhere. And I have seen a post from BioWare, I can't remember where, don't quote me on this, um, that kind of said that multiplayer was about putting in the time as well before you started getting rewards. So I can only kind of guess at how long you actually have to put in before you can get something out of it. Like I said, 20 hours so far doesn't really feel like I've got much out of it. I'm not really going to be putting too much more time into multiplayer without joining groups with friends in the future, because I just don't find it rewarding. I haven't unlocked any classes. I barely got any upgrades for my characters that I'm playing. I've been playing the Keeper, and while my keeper has been leveled quite well and got all new skills and things. That's about all that I've really seen, and haven't really been able to unlock any new characters to play with. And that may just be me not knowing what to do, but I kind of feel like after 20 hours, even if you don't know what you're doing, you probably should have got something out of it. But other than that, it is really solid gameplay. It's a little bit laggy at times, jumps around and stuff, but nothing so major as to interrupt your gameplay for the majority of the time, which is really fun. But that's basically it for multiplayer. I haven't had a massive time in there, and it's not really my cup of tea. Kind of like Mass Effect 3's multiplayer, um, and if you were into Mass Effect 3's multiplayer, you'd probably be into this. I thought I would enjoy this a bit more. I have enjoyed it. I do enjoy it on occasion with friends, but it's not something that I will personally be following and going into Dragon Age simply to do multiplayer, because it's not that interesting, in my opinion. And to wrap things up, we will look at like my overall impression, the game in its entirety. The single player, multiplayer, it's a very big game. There's a lot to do. However, the story kind of felt a bit too short compared to the amount of content that's in the game. Maybe they're waiting on DLC to justify this. Maybe I missed the point completely, and that it's about the majority of the game and not necessarily the story. But I did feel that the story kind of felt a bit underwhelmed and got detracted by the amount of content and side quests that you can do in the game. Um, Not saying it was bad. I like a lot of the side quests and everything, but it was a lot to do, a lot. And I had a lot more fun kind of exploring the areas and aiming more for completion, getting all of the shards, all of the bottles of Thetis, and closing rifts and things like that. I had more fun focusing on those things and exploring the areas than I did on the individual stories of areas or even the main story at times. But that's not to say it wasn't great. The dialogue was excellent. Absolutely loved it. Writing was really, really good and witty at parts. However, some of the acting did fall flat in places, but was kind of held up quite well by the imagination of the writers. And you can see that when interacting with characters like Varric or Sarah or Iron Bull, they provide a lot of comedy sort of relief and have really interesting, great writing behind those characters. Really, really love them. It just fell flat a little bit in acting in some parts. But it felt nice and solid overall. Really, really solid. Ending wasn't really that climactic. It was an ending. There was some good spoiler stuff that I won't mention, chucked in after the credits and things. But overall, a little bit anticlimactic at the end. Um, but it was great, and I put in 100 hours in my first playthrough on nightmare difficulty, going back on normal difficulty, and going to be playing through my mage. And it is definitely a game that I will come back to, and I will play more of. It is a really original sort of game. Its setting is fantastic. Absolutely love the setting. Graphics are amazing. They're my kind of graphics. I really, really like that. It's not too realistic, but it's not cartoony at all. Provides a really fantastic atmosphere to get involved with. Character writing and interactions were great. I'm actually looking forward to getting more into the characters, individual characters' stories through this playthrough, as I missed a number of characters involving Solus. I missed some of Iron Bull's. Cassandra, I missed a little bit. Um, and I didn't even touch Cole. I never even used him in my party once. I never talked to him throughout the entire campaign. So that's definitely something that I'll have to go back and investigate for sure. So there is definitely a lot still pulling me back and making me want to play the game, which is really, 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 really great after 100 hours of playing to still want to actually go back. So I've fully got my money's worth. I've fully enjoyed it. It's a thoroughly enjoyable game. Um, there are a lot of gripes in some places. Like I said, there was a lot of ranting throughout this video, and that's not to say it's not a great game. There's just a lot in there that I would have changed. One thing that I didn't mention as well is inventory and things like that. The inventory I hated the inventory system completely throughout the game. That is not something that I can even remotely enjoy or condone in a game like that. Having a system where your trash is labeled as valuables, as well as your valuables labeled as valuables in the same pack, with nothing to distinguish what they are, and flavor text on random items and no flavor text on other random items, and not knowing what I can sell, what I can't sell, having no proper breakdown in that category, as well as accessories as well, not being really broken down all that well. And God forbid the crafting materials ever get put into order, because my God, when you get to the end of the game and you're trying to craft a tier 3 schematic, it's going to take you a while just to sift through the items to find the one you're looking for, because nothing is ordered. And that's about all I'm going to say for it. I can forgive that. I can forgive the inventory system because the rest of the game is really good. The story is solid. It's fun. It may be a little bit too short, but that's only compared to the colossal amount of stuff that you can actually do in the game. and I'm looking forward to getting back into it. So there's my honest to goodness rant about Dragon Age. I think I might go collapse. This went for far longer than I expected. Thank you for putting up with it. That has been me. My name is Neralyte. Thank you for listening.